interesting you mentioned Jimmy Lai, because the latest thing that's happened with that is Jimmy Lai has been trying to get a British attorney to be able to represent him in his national security law case. And there's been this fight where the Hong Kong government has been trying to prevent him from being able to use a British attorney. And then the Hong Kong court ruled that it was okay for him to use this British attorney. And now the Hong Kong government has asked the CCP to intervene and interpret the national security law, hopefully on their side, right, to keep Jimmy Lai from being able to use this attorney. So
that's infuriating.
I mean,
that is like literally what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, it's and also they delayed his trial.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is arbitrary. I mean, you're right to there's no right to a speedy and fair trial in China, including Hong Kong now.
Yeah, that's quite. I mean, it's appalling and terrifying to watch that happen.
And so, you know, given that there was legal reform under Deng Xiaoping, it's Jiang Zemin's legacy that has ensured that China's legal system has been completely corrupted forever.
Yeah. I mean, not that Deng was a great guy. Like, I feel like the thing about general hostility is that
we're not going to look back on Deng either.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, it's just that, like, in the 80s, largely led by Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang, there was, like, these guys were actually pushing for some kind of political reform. And then the rest of the party, kind of like just a little bit. But then the rest of the party was like, nah, and purged Hu Yaobang. And then purged Zhao Ziyang.
I mean, like, Hu Yaobang also, he wasn't, like, asking for democracy or anything.
No.
Like, these are all CCP people in the end. So, like, in their actions, the CCP always has to come out on top. Zhao Ziyang may be an exception to this because he basically sacrificed his political career and freedom to try to prevent the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yeah, I mean, he spent the rest of his life under house arrest.
Yeah, like literally
he went from being like the guy who was going to succeed Deng Xiaoping to house arrest for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he literally, right after leaving Tiananmen Square, was put under house arrest.
Yeah.
And he died in 2005 under house arrest.
Yeah.
So, in a way, I guess you could say that Zhao Ziyang made a choice there.
Yeah, and like, you know, we were talking about with Hu Jintao, like just how in this system, like you never know who your friends are, you know, like everyone's enemy. Like once upon a time, these two guys were considered Deng Xiaoping's left and right hands, and he was completely willing to throw them under the bus.
Wait, who was?
Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang.
Oh,
they were called his you know, left and right hand, and then he was fine throwing them under the bus for, you know, ultimately preserving the totalitarian grip of the Communist Party itself. And then put Jiang in power, who then created the mess we're in today.
There is one more thing that Jiang did that I think a lot of people don't know a lot about.
I see it in the notes.
Yeah, which is that he led a crackdown of the one-child policy in 1990. And this kind of directly led to China's demographic collapse that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
Because the one-child policy technically had been in place since the late 70s, but like the enforcement was in the beginning, it was very light. Even during the 80s, like it was kind of like in different places you'd find different levels of enforcement. But by the 80s, they had developed a system where like women had to have their periods monitored by the workplaces, and once you had a kid, you had to apply to have a kid, and then once you had a kid, like they would insert an IUD into you immediately so that you couldn't have more kids. And there were a bunch of other things that were already set up, but there were still a lot of holes in the system, and Jiang led like kind of a nationwide I guess, attempt to strengthen the one-child policy and make it more strict. And that led directly to things like there was a county in the Shandong province called Guan County, which in 1991, they were reprimanded by the Shandong provincial leadership for having too many births in their county. So they decided they would have, the party leader of that county decided they would have a campaign of 100 childless days. So 100 days, no babies, which meant that if you were already pregnant, forced abortion. If your kid was born in those 100 days, they literally killed babies, Like, this is something that didn't come out until many years later, but it was like a brutal massacre of, you know, any baby that was born during that time. Like, people were trying to hide their kids. It was like a really terrible thing. And this was directly because of pressure from the provincial government, because of pressure from the national central government, because there were too many births happening still under the one-child policy.
But Jiang, he was such an intelligent and joyful man.
But actually, like, the long-term consequences, right? The credit card debt of, even if you're not horrified at that from a human level, like, the long-term problems now are that, China is, the birth rate is so low that they are not able to essentially replace the population. And I think the projections are that by 2100, like 2100, that, like, China's population will be half
Wow.
of what it is, 730 million people.
And that's not even including any kind of like famine caused by like natural disasters from like not having water anymore because they've polluted the country so much.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's a long way away, so we don't know what'll happen in 80 years, but the population's already started shrinking.
Yeah.
Like, that whole, if you look at the China's birth rate since the 90s, is essentially been flat.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how just like how like corrosive this kind of evilness is. Like, they did these horrible things, and like that's causing all kinds of problems in Chinese society today. But also like the West's willingness to like turn a blind eye to that and get so invested in China, it's also corroding us here. Just the fact that we're dependent on medical supplies from China. The fact that if China does have this kind of massive economic collapse, we're all tied. Our economies are all tied there. It will also completely derail our societies as well. And just like these horribly evil things that are done just have this corrosive effect that just destroys human societies.
Remember when people were like, oh, if we let China join the World Trade Organization, they're going to become more liberalized like us. But in fact, what has happened is we in the West have become more like China.
Again, looking at Apple and their willingness to support the Chinese regime. Google, once upon a time, said, don't be evil. And they got rid of that.
I mean, you have to slowly get rid of
become more evil.
Yeah, but there's so many opportunities to make money in China if only you can sacrifice your values.
Wicked Babylon.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been terribly corrosive to the entire planet, and thank you, Jiang Zemin.
Yeah, I mean, not that he was the origin of all of the terrible things that happened under the CCP.
No, it would be the Dirty Reds.
I agree with that. What about you, Shelley?
Shelley, you look like you could use some raw liver to live your most actualized primal self. Okay, fine. Let's talk about the protests. Well, I mean, this does kind of carry on directly from the Jiang Zemin thing, because zero COVID is, a result of, like, it wouldn't be able to exist without the security apparatus Jiang helped build, particularly internet surveillance.
Yeah, I mean,
which the West also helped China build.
It's interesting because I think that anybody who was head of the CCP during the time when the internet was starting to happen would probably have built the Great Firewall. Like, the CCP just could not last without that type of information suppression. But what I didn't know, which was until reading Ethan Gutman's book, The Slaughter, was that in the mind of the central leadership, that a lot of the internet censorship was needed to fight Falun Gong, because he had interviewed Hao Fengjun, who was a Chinese defector who had been a 610 police officer. And from Hao's basic testimony was that the beginning of a lot of these internet censorship apparatuses was because they were trying to fight Falun Gong on the internet.
And so that just goes back to that idea of like how these like, like when you turn a blind eye to evil, like what was happening with Falun Gong, like that just has so many consequences down the line that is now like affecting us. Like if people had like, actually done something about crimes against humanity in China, like that. Basically, it's just, they turned a blind eye and then China like became the Orwellian surveillance state.
If there had
today.
been,
And then they used it on the next group, the Uyghurs, and now they're using it on the next group, which is basically every person in China under zero COVID.
And, that destroys their economy, which then hurts us as well. It's like when you turn a blind eye to evil, there are consequences.
Yeah, but there's really no reason to speak out on behalf of Falun Gong if you're not Falun Gong.
or if you're not a Uyghur,
Right.
And hey, wasn't Jiang a reformer? What a mess.
So anyway, yes, the internet censorship was developed in large part because they needed a way to block Falun Gong websites from spreading information that was counter to the propaganda narrative.
I had no
party.
I had no idea. I mean, although, even Cisco and they're looking at opportunities to help sell routers and equipment to China to build the firewall, had a PowerPoint presentation where they acknowledged essentially that like one of the reasons that the CCP wanted to build the internet security was for to persecute Falun Gong.
I mean,
It's in a Cisco PowerPoint.
I saw the slide deck and it was something like this can assist in monitoring groups like Falun Gong. And there was actually a lawsuit about that. But what I recall is that Cisco was able to avoid the lawsuit on some kind of technical grounds. So they're not held responsible for anything like that. They just helped China build the firewall. No problem.
I mean, they didn't technically, they just sold them a bunch of stuff.
They just sold them the tools.
And taught them how to use it so they could build the firewall themselves.
Yeah, it's like, just because the U.S. gave the Taliban a bunch of weapons and military training doesn't mean...
Oh, you mean in the 70s?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, I don't know that the U.S. purposely gave the Taliban weapons, but I was thinking of...
Yes,
a
yeah,
couple years
exactly.
ago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That too, just leaving them a bunch of weapons.
We are in a horrible timeline, aren't we?
Yeah.
Where the Liver King isn't natty.
Yeah, that's truly the tragedy. But I think we were just
Kanye
trying to
West is
talk
insane.
about the white paper protests.